Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into a place that once held the breath of gods, the Hypostyle Hall of Karnak Temple. Imagine a vast stone forest where every column is thicker than a tree trunk and so tall you could fit a giraffe wearing a top hat underneath. The air smells of warm dust, dried incense, and ancient limestone as if time itself left a lingering aroma. This hall wasn't just architecture, it was a stone amplifier for prayer secrets and a few weird sounds no one could quite explain. You're about to walk barefoot across its cool stone floor with only your whisper-soft steps and the distant coo of doves to keep you company. You might hear something, or think you do. That's how it starts. See, this wasn't just a temple, it was a sound chamber, a dream trap, and maybe even the original surround sound system for the gods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, like a hammock in Hawaii or under a weighted blanket in Sweden, drop your location and time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drag your feet through the pale sand just outside the Great Hall. The sunrise hasn't crested over the eastern pylons yet, but already the giant columns loom ahead like petrified giants. You shiver, not from cold, but from the weight of so much stone overhead. It's like walking into a mouth halfway open, wondering if it'll speak or swallow you. A sleepy ibis flaps awkwardly across the courtyard, then settles on one of the ledges. You wonder if it's early, or if that bird has just been judging humans for 3,000 years. Probably both. The sandstone beneath your soles is cool and a little gritty, like the polished back of some great lizard. As you pass through the threshold, you instinctively lower your voice. Even if you have nothing to say, it feels rude to talk loudly here. The walls have ears and columns, and some of them are carved with ears just to make that point. Light trickles in from above in strange patterns. It slices through the upper spaces like honey through a cracked jar. And as it moves, it paints the glyphs along the pillars in slow motion gold. You reach out, run your fingers along one, a falcon with outstretched wings. It's got the smirk of a bird who knows you won't make it through this day without stepping in something weird. Your first real duty of the day is sweeping. Glamorous, right? But in ancient Egypt, sweeping isn't just cleaning, it's devotional. You're brushing away the chaos of the outside world. You and a few other novices move in long, slow arcs. Your broom's made of date palm twigs tied with goat sinew. Each sweep kicks up a small puff of fine dust, and with it, the faint smell of myrrh from a forgotten offering. Then it happens. A sound. Just a tiny one like a whisper, but not made by any throat. You freeze. So does the boy beside you. You both glance up at the columns, then at each other. No one's mouth is moving. It's just the gods breathing, he whispers, in that serious way only 12-year-olds can manage while standing in an echoing temple at dawn. You try to smile, but goosebumps betray you. You think you hear it again, a soft rush like someone brushing cloth against stone. Maybe a bird inside, maybe your own nerves playing tricks. In the shadows, you spot the high attendant of Seshat. He's impossibly old, like maybe he wrote hieroglyphics before they were cool old. He moves like a turtle blessed with good posture. As he passes, his sandal slaps the floor, a soft tack, tack. That seems too slow to be human, but too rhythmic to ignore. Do you hear it? He asks. without looking at you. You're not sure what he means, so you nod like a good temple novice. He smiles slightly. Then you're ready to listen. And just like that, he disappears into the colonnade, swallowed by the carved shadows. As the sun climbs, the first real light enters the Hypostyle Hall. You feel the shift. The columns cast long shadows now like spears, frozen in mid-thrust. This isn't just morning light. This is performance lighting for gods who expect good theater. A wind passes through the hall, but here's the weird part. It doesn't feel like it came from outside. It's like the temple itself exhaled. In the center of the hall stands a massive lotus-topped column, the grandest of them all. You approach because, of course, curiosity is stronger than fear. Always has been. You place your palm against the stone. It's warm now, even though there's no sun on it. That's when you hear something again, not outside, but inside, like a pulse, like a breath caught between syllables. You jerk your hand away, then place it back again, slower this time. Nothing. You lean your ear to the stone, and now you hear something so soft it might be imagined. A thrum, a purr. Maybe this is what gods sound like when they sleep. As you step back, a sudden flutter of birds outside the temple gate startles you. You laugh a little, mostly to calm yourself down. But it echoes oddly. Your laugh bounces once, twice, then vanishes. Sound doesn't travel the way it should in here. It moves like it has rules, like someone invisible is editing it on the fly, and you're just the guest. You start to move again, heading deeper into the maze of stone. A whisper trails behind you so faint you almost miss it. Still listening, you are now. You slip behind one of the mid-sized columns, a little embarrassed by how quickly your heart is still thumping from whatever that whisper was or wasn't. It's probably just the wind, you tell yourself. Or maybe that ibis is moonlighting as a ventriloquist. Yeah, let's go with that. A few other novices shuffle into place on the far side of the hall, carrying rolled papyri and long reeds dipped in ink. You follow mostly because standing alone next to a whispering wall is not your new hobby. The group gathers in a semicircle on a low stone bench right beneath a carved ceiling where stars have been painted in gold leaf, now flaking slightly like old pastry. One of the scribes begins to read aloud from the chart of Deacon's star deities that rise one by one throughout the night. His voice is calm and rhythmical, like a metronome for the stars. Another priest begins to hum softly, matching the rise and fall of the words. It feels rehearsed, too rehearsed. You sit down, legs crossed, pretending to focus. But honestly, you're more mesmerized by the way the sound hugs the space. The voice doesn't echo exactly. It coils upward, dancing around the column above you before slipping away into the painted darkness overhead. Then one of the older novices nudges you and whispers, "Watch the shadows." You do. At first, nothing. But as the sun shifts ever so slightly, one particular shadow cast by a carved figure of Horus holding a flail aligns perfectly with a diagonal crack on the stone floor. Together, they form the unmistakable shape of an eye. Not just any eye. The eye of Ra. Only on this day, the novice says, nodding like he's told this story 100 times. When Sirius rises with the sun, you blink. The odds of that happening by chance, not high. And yet here you are, watching sunlight and shadows play celestial games across the floor like it's ancient Photoshop. The priest continues reciting, but now you're only half listening. because the shadows start to move again, even though you're fairly certain the sun hasn't. One shape melts into another. A lion's head becomes a vulture's wing. A spear becomes a ladder. And for one fleeting second, the shadow of your own head seems to grow horns. You scoot an inch away from the column. You're not superstitious or anything, but just in case it's a cursed horn shadow day, you'd like to avoid being the main character in that story. A bell rings from deeper in the temple, a real bell, not metaphorical, not in your head. It's thin and high-pitched, like the sound a spoon makes when it hits the edge of a delicate cup. You stand instinctively, as do the others. This is the moment when the star speech transitions into the calendar reading, or as one of the older scribes calls it, the part where we argue about leap days. You follow them into a smaller alcove. It's warmer here close, and slightly smoky, like someone's been burning cedar and forgetting to open a window for 3,000 years. The walls are painted with scenes of seasons, harvests, floods, animal migrations, even a cat dragging a duck and looking far too smug about it. A priest with a voice like smooth gravel begins a chant. He moves his arm in slow arcs above a large painted circle that represents the Egyptian year. Sirius sits at the top, the queen of the sky, while all other constellations take supporting roles. As he chants, he drops tiny stones onto the circle, one for each rising star of importance. One of the stones bounces and lands near your foot. You pick it up. It's smooth, almost glassy, and glows faintly pink in the torchlight. Desert rose, the priest says, without pausing the chant, grew only once after the Nile flooded in reverse. You don't ask how that's possible. You're still catching up with the concept of time being measured by rocks and shadows instead of your usual how long until lunch method. The chant grows louder now, almost feverish. The other novices start murmuring too, and for a second it sounds like wind blowing through reeds, or the sound you hear when you put your ear to a conch shell. But all around you. Then the priest slams a staff into the center of the calendar. Silence. Everyone freezes. Even the torch flames seem to hold their breath. You swallow. And then the priest says matter-of-factly, New Year begins at moon's breath. Prepare the incense. Everyone nods as if he just announced a lunch break instead of cosmic time realignment. You start to back away, letting the others handle the incense preparation. But the gravel-voiced priest catches your sleeve. You, he says, must write the first blessing. You blink again. You who only just stopped calling Horace the bird guy 5 weeks ago. But before you can panic, he hands you a papyrus scroll already dusted with powdered malachite. Just listen, he says. And so, you do. You listen. And as you press the reed to the scroll, a phrase comes into your head, unprompted, unexpected, unexplainable. You write it anyway. And in the distance, from somewhere within the stone forest, you think you hear something shift. A new sound. A sound that had been waiting for just the right moment to be heard. You don't sleep much that night. Not because the temple is loud, far from it. It's the quiet that gets to you. The kind that creeps under your skin and whispers to your brain, hey, want to rethink every mysterious sound from earlier today. So you lie there, wrapped in a linen blanket that smells faintly of crushed reed and temple oil, staring up at a ceiling you can't quite see. And then morning comes. Or maybe it's still the same night. It's hard to tell when your only clock is the occasional owl cough and the unsettling thump of something very large moving in the lotus pond outside. You're summoned early. A temple attendant with sandals quieter than guilt taps you on the forehead and points down a corridor you've never been down before. You get up because saying no to an old man with tattooed eyelids doesn't seem like a wise career move, and shuffle along the sandstone floor, yawning so hard your jaw clicks. He leads you into a chamber deep within the Hypostyle Hall's foundation. It's cool here, damp in a way that temple air rarely is. You can hear drip, not water, but a sound like honey falling onto stone, thick and slow. The air hums faintly, not from chanting or wind, but from the sheer weight of everything around you. Here, the floor is different, less polished. You kneel without being asked, and the attendant, without ever having spoken, takes a long bronze rod and begins tapping on various flagstones. 1, 2, 3, tap, tap, tap. Then stop. He motions for you to place your ear to the stone. You do, and that's when you hear it. Whispers, clear as anything, but not from above and not from your side, from beneath. At first it's just a murmur, like wind catching under a door. Then it sharpens words you don't understand, but feel like you should. They rise from beneath the floor like smoke through a sieve. You pull back suddenly and stare at the stone, half expecting a face to emerge from it like some sort of ancient pop-up book. The attendant doesn't flinch. He just leans on his staff and says finally, in a voice dry as desert bones, "This hall hears more than it speaks." Then he's gone back into whatever crawl space he uses to teleport. You sit alone now, blinking at the flagstones. Then you notice something else, tiny grooves etched into the floor, not hieroglyphs, not even decorative. These are patterns, long looping spirals that converge toward certain stones. It's like someone carved soundtracks directly into the temple floor. You try tapping lightly with your fingers. Nothing dramatic happens, but you feel a vibration, a hum. And then you remember something the older scribe once muttered between yawns. Every floor has a voice, but you have to crawl to hear it. That was meant as a joke. You think right. Later, back in the upper halls, you approach one of the senior priests. He's brushing gold pigment onto a carved falcon's crown with the casual elegance of someone decorating their third falcon of the day. You tell him about the floor. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he nods slowly and says, "They say the columns speak up, but the floor remembers. That's where the gods hide the things we're not ready for." You blink. So, like buried secrets. He chuckles. Or buried complaints. The gods are dramatic. You start paying more attention to the floors after that. Not just listening, but watching. You notice that certain priests always walk along specific paths, never stepping across some of the stones. At first you think it's superstition, but then you see that when they do step over them, just once the wind in the hall changes. Like the air disagrees with them. You test it once on a dare. You step directly across 3 taboo stones. Nothing happens at first. But then a statue falls. A small one, yes, and probably already teetering on the edge of that pedestal for centuries. Still, a coincidence? Maybe. But the high priest of Horus gives you a look that says, "Do it again, and you'll be sweeping ibis drop-ins for the rest of your life." You return to the whispering floor the next morning, alone. You place your hand flat on the stone, not expecting much. But the moment your skin touches it, you feel a tiny pulse, like a heartbeat. And then in a language that might not be words, the stone says something, or you imagine it does. Either way, you whisper back, because somehow it would be rude not to. The next day begins like a fever dream with sandals. You're sent to the far west corner of the Hypostyle Hall. the part shadowed for most of the year, where light only slips in sideways and everything smells faintly of limestone and mystery. Your assignment, polishing columns, not glamorous. But then again, this whole temple isn't exactly running on glamour. It's powered by routine ritual and occasionally very confused birds. You're handed a smooth cloth and a bowl of olive oil mixed with ground hematite. The mixture smells oddly like old pennies in summer heat. You dab the cloth walk up to one of the bigger columns, a lotus-topped behemoth easily thicker than your bedroom, and begin to polish in slow circles. Then a sound stops you. Not a voice, not a whisper. A hum, low, resonant, like a sleepy didgeridoo being played in the basement of the universe. You lean your ear toward the column. The sound continues, not steady like a chant, but pulsing. A rhythm, almost like breathing. A shadow moves behind you. You whirl around, nearly dropping the bowl of oil which would have turned the floor into the world's first priest skating rink. But it's only an elder acolyte, one of the silent ones. They take a vow of complete silence for a year to better hear the gods. And judging by the look on his face, the gods just told him, your column trick is a bit above your clearance level. He tilts his head, raises one brow, and then gently places his hand on the column's surface. Then he hums, not loudly, a soft tone, almost like he's harmonizing with a memory. The column responds, not dramatically. It doesn't sing a pop anthem or recite inscriptions in ancient dialect. But the hum changes pitch. You hear it too. You can feel it in your chest and your spine, a sound so low and so solid it doesn't feel like sound at all. It feels like standing inside a giant's rib cage. The silent one nods, solemnly presses both palms to the stone, and walks away as if nothing happened. You stand there, hand still against the column, trying to understand what just happened. Later, you find a hidden corner of the temple where the floor is etched with diagrams not of gods or battles, but of sound waves, concentric circles, wavy lines that seem to ripple out from small central dots like echoes sketched in stone. Next to them is a tiny inscription. Stone sings when man forgets he is listening. You frown. Stone sings. You test the theory. You find a quiet column, place your palm to the base, and hum a note. Nothing fancy, just a single, sustained like you're contemplating a particularly good fig. And the column answers, not loudly, not even immediately, but just as your breath runs out, you hear it, a tiny tremor in the stone, like a god saying, I'm still here, just quieter than you expected. Over the next week, you practice, a little here, a little there, when no one's watching. You discover that each column seems to prefer a different pitch. One resonates with a deep tone, another with a higher note. A few ignore you entirely, which feels frankly a bit rude for divine architecture. You tell one of the junior scribes. He laughs, then tells you about an old priest who once tuned the whole hall for a festival. He stood in the middle, hummed like a human tuning fork, and every column sang back. Or so the story goes, the scribe adds with a shrug, but historians still debate whether that was literal or just wine-induced exaggeration. Of course they do, but that doesn't stop you from trying. One night, long after everyone's asleep, you sneak into the hall and stand right in the center, where the moonlight filters down like a spotlight on a forgotten stage. You close your eyes, you hum, and for one suspended second, the air tightens. Your hum is echoed, not exactly matched, not quite delayed, but answered, from 3 different columns, and then a 4th, and then silence again. Your heart pounds. The Hypostyle Hall isn't just a place of worship, it's a listening chamber, a place where echoes aren't just sound, they're participation, they're memory. You exhale slowly, overwhelmed, and lean against one of the columns. It hums again, like it's saying, "We heard you." The morning begins with a strange stillness, like even the doves know something unusual is about to happen. You wake up to a quiet so intentional, it feels like someone ironed the air flat. No one's speaking, and no one's rushing. Yet everything moves with purpose. You quickly learn why today is the royal procession. Not just any procession, but the kind that only happens once every few years when the boy king, still somewhere between losing baby teeth and learning how to raise a scepter, visits the Hypostyle Hall to be ceremonially crowned as the living god Horus. Even the older priests, who normally glide around the temple as if they've transcended mortal time, are now actually bustling. You're given simple instructions: stay out of the way, look useful, and don't touch anything that looks remotely expensive, which unfortunately includes pretty much everything within 100-cubit radius. So naturally, you do what any curious initiate would do. You find a spot behind one of the wide columns where the shadow is just long enough to hide you, but not so dark that you can't peek with interest and minimal guilt. From your hiding spot, the Hypostyle Hall looks different today. The light streaming in through the slits above seems more dramatic, more golden, as if even the sun has RSVP'd to this royal pageant. The columns, usually silent and reverent, feel like they're leaning in to watch. You press your back to one and wait, listening to the sounds of preparation, the brush of sandals across smooth stone, the sharp rustle of ceremonial linens being straightened, the clink of precious metal as priests adjust their gold-adorned belts. A soft scent of blue lotus and myrrh wafts through the air, and though you've smelled it before, it suddenly smells more serious, like it knows this scent is part of something the gods are supposed to notice. Then comes the hush, not the awkward accidental kind, but the heavy practiced quiet that tells you everyone is in position. The procession enters from the eastern end, and your breath catches. At the center walks the boy king, no older than 10, wearing a Nemes headcloth with a cobra that seems almost too alive. He is covered in gold so bright it flickers when he moves, and he holds the crook and flail with both hands, like someone gripping the handles of a very expensive lunchbox. His face is stoic, but behind the stoicism you can see it: fear, excitement, confusion. It's the face of a child who knows he's supposed to look divine, but isn't sure if he remembered to wipe his nose. Surrounding him are priests, clad in animal skins and white linen, chanting in tones that seem to melt into the columns themselves. You don't understand all the words, but the rhythm alone is hypnotic. The sound seems to come from the walls, not their throats, like the temple itself is speaking through them. You watch as the boy is led to a raised platform near the center of the hall, where the great golden effigy of Horus stands. The high priest raises his hands, invoking the spirit of the falcon god, calling him down to inhabit the young pharaoh. The chants rise, harmonizing with the occasional metallic jingle of ritual instruments. For a moment, the temple feels like it's vibrating, not in an earthquake sense, but In the someone turned up the bass on divine frequency sense. You feel it in your ribs. A breeze stirs not from outside but from within, like the gods themselves just exhaled. Then the high priest places the sacred crown on the boy's head, and the room erupts not in applause but in carefully orchestrated praise. Hands lift, more incense is burned, and voices rise in poetic verses declaring the king to be Horus in flesh. It's breathtaking, sacred. You find yourself nodding instinctively, believing for one suspended second that maybe, just maybe, the gods really do inhabit these children, these spaces, these rituals. And then you hear it, a whisper, sharp, human, close. He still wets the bed. You whip your head toward the source, but the speaker is already merging back into the ceremonial rhythm face, serene as a statue. You nearly choke trying not to laugh. You're not supposed to laugh. No one is. But the absurdity of crowning a god-king while priests gossip about his nighttime habits, it's too much. And yet, you realize in that moment, this is probably not the first time such a contradiction has existed here. The divine and the deeply human are folded into each other like layers of papyrus, one sweet the other, slightly ridiculous. The ceremony winds down with the priests escorting the boy pharaoh deeper into the temple for the private blessings no initiate is allowed to see. You remain in your spot behind the column heart, still buzzing from what you just witnessed. The air feels heavier now, as if the temple itself is absorbing the memory of this moment. You step out cautiously, walking along the stone floor that now seems somehow more sacred, more alive. You pass the platform where the crown was placed and notice that one of the gold feathers decorating it has fallen off and been left behind. You stoop to examine it, but a priest appears out of nowhere and scoops it up with the speed and precision of someone whose entire job is to prevent the young from touching relics. You return to your usual corridor, but nothing feels quite the same. You start wondering about all the kings before this one, their awkward coronations, their whispered embarrassments, their divine responsibilities dumped on them while they still had missing teeth. You begin to understand that this temple isn't just a machine for channeling godly power. It's a stage, a very serious, incredibly ancient, and sometimes laughably human stage. And behind every column, there are stories not just carved into the stone, but floating in the air, wrapped in incense and half-swallowed laughter. As you walk past the line of columns on your way out, you reach out and touch one. It's warm from the sun, smooth and solid, and unbothered by anything that happened today. For all its grandeur, it remains indifferent. But just as your hand leaves the stone, you think no. You feel a soft vibration, a tiny pulse. Like a snicker, maybe. Like the column itself heard that whispered joke and decided to remember it. You wake before dawn the next day, summoned by one of the younger priests, who knocks on the stone near your sleeping mat instead of your forehead. This time, a small but welcome improvement in communication strategy. The sky outside is still indigo, and the temple is cloaked in that in-between silence that happens when night hasn't quite left, but day hasn't dared arrive. You're handed a small satchel and told without any flair or clarity you're on incense duty. You assume this means more than just burning things and waving your arms dramatically. At least you hope it does. The task begins in a small chamber near the eastern colonnade, where long wooden tables are laid out with dozens of ceramic jars. The room smells like a spice market collapsed into a florist's shop and was then abandoned in the sun for a week. There's myrrh and frankincense, of course, but also crushed cedar-powdered cinnamon, dried blue lotus bits of acacia bark resin that looks like crystallized honey, and something oily and dark that you're told is sacred, but smells suspiciously like roasted onion. You're assigned to a mortar, nearly the size of a washing basin, and instructed to grind a specific mixture blue lotus myrrh and a few grains of desert salt. As you work, a senior priest leans over your shoulder and says in the same tone someone might use when reminding you not to microwave metal, "The god won't awaken unless the scent matches what he remembers from the first Nile bloom." You look up unsure if he's serious or poetically vague for fun. He stares at you until the awkwardness has fully settled into your bones, then moves on. You get back to grinding. The mix is sticky and stubborn. Resisting the pestle like it knows being burned is its destiny. Nearby, a pair of temple boys are shaping small incense cones from the mixture, rolling them with their thumbs, like they're making pastries for a very picky ghost. One of them whispers that during last year's summer rites, the scent blend was accidentally switched, and instead of summoning a moon, they apparently summoned a flock of bees. Historians still debate whether it was a divine sign or just someone being stupid. He adds with a grin, "You quietly double-check your ingredients." The incense is to be placed before the statue of the god in the inner sanctuary, a chamber few initiates ever see, and definitely not one you're allowed to enter. Instead, your job is to prepare the final batch and hand it off to a priest whose expression is so blank it may have been carved that way. He accepts the bowl and vanishes through a carved doorway that closes behind him without a sound. You're left standing in the hall, your hands covered in sticky brown paste, unsure if you just participated in divine ritual or ancient aromatherapy. After you clean your hands in a shallow basin that's cold enough to sting your fingers, you return to your usual sweeping circuit in the outer hall. But your mind keeps drifting. You keep thinking about that phrase, "The god won't awaken unless the scent matches what he remembers." It's oddly comforting and wildly unsettling all at once. Gods apparently are like everyone's grandpa when it comes to breakfast. One wrong smell and they're not getting out of bed. You begin to wonder how many of these rituals are more about memory than power. The god isn't summoned exactly. He's coaxed, lured, reminded. It's not domination, it's hospitality. He doesn't just live in the statue. He visits it like an old man returning to his childhood home to see if it still smells like river reeds and warm bread. You walk past the columns and catch the faintest whiff of the blue lotus blend still lingering in the air like a dream you barely remember. The hall feels different now, quieter, but charged, like the walls are leaning in sniffing. One of the older scribes, who always smells faintly of wine-soaked figs and knows more than he lets on, joins you by the southern wall. He watches you sweep for a moment, then says without preamble, "The scent used to be so precise they say it could make even a sleeping god cry or sneeze. We don't really know which." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. That's why they stopped using onion bark. Too many divine reactions. Later that afternoon, you sneak back to the incense chamber, not to mix, just to smell. You lean over the jars and take in each scent slowly. Some are soothing. Some are strange. One makes you sneeze immediately. But just one hits you in a way that's hard to explain. It smells like riverbanks at dusk, like warm stones, like the air just before the first summer storm. You close your eyes and inhale again, and for a moment you're not in the temple. You're standing at the edge of the Nile barefoot, the mud between your toes, the sky cracked open above you, and then you hear it again. That breath, not yours. The kind of soft inhalation that doesn't come from lungs, but from stone. A deep intake of memory, of scent, of recognition. You open your eyes. The jars are still. The room is empty. But something somewhere just woke up. There are corners of the Hypostyle Hall you haven't been allowed to enter, and until now, you've been perfectly fine with that. Forbidden spaces have a certain charm from a distance, like desserts on someone else's plate. But today, something changes. One of the senior priests, who usually floats around the temple like a particularly judgmental cloud, stops you mid-task. He taps the side of your broom with his staff, leans in and whispers, "Come, you're ready to hear how stone speaks in private." That is not by any metric a comforting sentence. But curiosity is stronger than caution, and anyway, you weren't doing a particularly good job sweeping in the first place. He leads you along a passage that curves away from the main hall behind one of the towering pillars whose capital blooms into a riot of stone petals. The light grows dimmer with each step, and the air shifts from warm and spiced to cool and breathless. The corridor narrows until you're ducking slightly, following the priest's flickering oil lamp as he disappears through a slit in the wall barely wide enough to admit a human, let alone divine presence. You squeeze through heart thudding, and suddenly you're inside what feels like the temple's spinal cord. It's a crawl space barely tall enough to kneel in, with stone walls grooved and etched like the inside of a throat. The priest places the lamp in a shallow niche and motions for you to press your ear to one of the walls. You hesitate. He raises one eyebrow in that disapproving Egyptian way that suggests, if you don't comply, you'll be reincarnated as a dung beetle. So you lean in expecting cold silence, maybe a bit of dust. What you hear instead is unmistakable a voice. Faint, clipped, not speaking words exactly, but something close syllables wrapped in vibration. The voice isn't inside the stone. It's moving through it. Like water in a hidden channel, it travels from somewhere else and exits here in this silent duct behind the column. You pull back too quickly, hitting your head on the low ceiling. The priest, unbothered, simply nods. Now, he says, you know how the gods once spoke. You rub the back of your head. Through crawl spaces. Through careful acoustics, he corrects. When the world was younger and men needed to believe, we built the temple to carry voices through stone. When the statue spoke, they wept. When the oracle whispered, they obeyed. He moves down the passage and taps another groove in the wall with his knuckle. The sound skips, echoes, bounces in a way that doesn't feel natural. These ducks, he says, aren't just for breath. They're for theater. As you crawl behind him, you notice how the walls have subtle curves, not random, but calculated. These channels were designed by people who understood how sound behaves. Not just echo and reverb, but direction, amplification, deception. You pass a small opening the size of a coin and pause. From this side, it looks like nothing. But on the other side, it opens into the sanctuary right above the statue of a moon, a perfectly placed hole. If you were to speak through it, your voice would emerge as if from the god's mouth itself. You shiver. The priest doesn't need to explain further. This was their secret, their sacred performance, a young acolyte hidden behind the wall speaking into the void. The congregation outside stunned, by the miracle of divine speech. The God had spoken. The temple had delivered. No one questioned the stone. And why would they? The sound came from where the sacred dwelled. You feel a mix of wonder and a hint of betrayal. Is it still holy? If it's engineered? The priest watches your reaction with mild amusement. The gods don't mind a little help, he says. They like to be heard. But men need a voice louder than silence. We merely provided the funnel. He begins crawling back toward the light, his knees barely making a sound on the smooth floor. You follow more clumsily, knees scraping dust, clinging to your robes. Just before you exit, he pauses and looks back. But there's something else he adds. Sometimes, rarely, the ducks carry sounds no one makes. You blink. What do you mean? He taps the wall, once, twice, then waits. From somewhere far inside the stone, a sound answers. Not a voice, not quite, just a ripple, a thrum, a syllable too old to name. He says nothing more and leaves you there crouched in the dim crawl space, heart pounding with questions. Later that evening, when the temple quiets and the scent of cedar smoke floats through the halls, you return to the ducked entrance alone. You press your ear to the stone again, hoping to catch even a fragment of the voice from before. But there is only silence, the heavy old kind that feels like it's waiting. You whisper something, your name maybe, or just a greeting, and wait. No answer. But as you pull back, you think you feel something through your fingertips. A pulse, like someone or something brushing back. The next morning, the priest says nothing about your visit, but he nods as you pass, and you sense that he knows you heard it. Maybe the temple didn't just carry voices. Maybe it remembers them too. You don't expect to be part of a ritual today. In fact, your plan is to sweep, maybe sneak in a nap behind one of the cooler columns, and absolutely avoid eye contact with anyone holding a ceremonial knife. But then you're called to the Hall of Judgment, which sounds dramatic because it is. The name alone is enough to tighten your chest a little. It's the part of the temple reserved for certain rites, mock rituals, training reenactments, a place where theology meets theater, and both pretend not to notice how absurd the other can be. You walk in cautiously and are met by two priests holding delicate ostrich feather fans, not for cooling, but for symbolism. At the center of the room lies a large stone slab carved with scenes of scales, hearts, feathers, and that ever-watchful figure of Anubis. A third priest approaches cradling what appears to be a preserved goat liver wrapped in linen. You don't ask questions. That kind of object invites only one of two reactions, reverence or comedy, and you're too new to know which is appropriate. The priest explains in a flat voice that today's demonstration is a rehearsal of moral reckoning, a ceremonial reenactment of the weighing of the heart, the test all souls must undergo in the Hall of Two Truths. You're familiar with the concept. When you die, your heart is weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and divine order. If your heart is heavy with sin, it's devoured by a soul-eating chimera named Ammit, who has the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the back end of a very disappointed hippopotamus. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you're welcomed into the field of reeds, a heavenly afterlife that sounds suspiciously like an eternal countryside picnic. You're ushered forward, and before you know it, you're cast in the role of the recently deceased. A fine honor, if slightly morbid. You kneel at the base of the slab while another initiate plays Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, holding a tablet to record your spiritual fitness. In truth, it's just a piece of painted wood, and he keeps winking at you like he's barely holding back laughter. You try to stay serious, but it's hard when your eternal fate is being judged by a boy who once accidentally burned an offering because he mistook olive oil for sacred wine. The ritual begins. One priest places the goat liver on one side of the stone scale. It wobbles slightly, and you swear it emits a faintly accusatory odor. Another priest gently places the feather of Mott on the opposite side, murmuring words of invocation. The room holds its breath. You pretend to as well. The scales shift. The feather dips lower. You are apparently virtuous, or at least less heavy than fermented meat. A small cheer erupts from the younger initiates watching, and you rise bowing awkwardly. It's meant to be symbolic, of course, but still a part of you walks away with a little spring in your step. You passed the test. You're technically worthy of paradise. Not a bad way to start the afternoon. Later, one of the older priests pulls you aside. He smells like dust and mint, and he smiles as though he's about to say something halfway between a joke and a confession. You know, he says, some of the old scrolls say the scales weren't always literal, that it wasn't your sins that made your heart heavy, but your regrets. He lets the words hang in the air. Sins can be forgiven. Regrets, not so easily. You think about that as you return to your sweeping. You think about the difference between guilt and weight, about how some people carry their lives with them pressed into their bones. You wonder what your heart would weigh now, not in judgment, but in grief. You remember that whisper in the stone, that exhale, that moment where it felt like something ancient had brushed against your soul and asked without words, "What have you left undone?" As the afternoon fades, you find yourself returning to the Hall of Judgment, not for another mock ritual, but just to look at the slab again, to imagine the scales. You take a reed and draw in the dust beside the altar, sketching a rough feather, a rough heart, a line connecting them both. You stare at it for a long time. Then you wipe it away with your hand. That night, as you lie beneath the open air of the outer cloister, you find sleep slow to come. Not because the stone is uncomfortable, though it is, but because your thoughts are heavy in a way you can't quite name. You wonder if the gods still watch the hearts of men, if they ever did, or if the scales were always just for us, a way to weigh ourselves in private when no one else is watching. Just before you drift off, you think you hear it again, a soft voice not from outside, but from within, a voice that asks no questions and gives no answers, only presence, only wait. You exhale slowly, and sleep finds you with its own kind of balance. By mid-morning the next day, something strange is already in the air. You can sense it before anyone says a word. The temple feels off. The breeze is too quiet, the birds unusually absent, and the novices are whispering louder than they should. You're halfway through tidying the northern corridor when a barefoot acolyte skids around a corner and nearly collides with you wide-eyed and breathless. There's a crocodile in the hall. He blurts, then sprints off again as if his own words might catch up and bite him. You stare after him, broom still in hand, unsure whether you've just heard an actual sentence or the start of a bad metaphor. You hurry toward the central court where a crowd has gathered near the temple pool. Some are murmuring prayers, others gesturing frantically, and a few simply gawking as if watching a very slow and very toothy miracle unfold. You push your way through until you see it, a long, scaled body slinking lazily across the temple floor, flicking its tail and blinking with the unbothered gaze of a creature who knows it belongs wherever it pleases. The sacred crocodile of Sobek, they say. An omen, maybe, or a mistake. The creature is magnificent, sleek, and dark, gliding over the stone like it's on a royal stroll. Several priests are already debating what to do, none willing to touch it, most unwilling to look directly at it. One particularly panicked priest declares that this is a divine interruption, that Sobek himself must be displeased perhaps over a poorly executed incense recipe. Another suggests that the temple pool's enclosure gate might have been left open, which prompts a much more human reaction, frantic looks and accusations. You quietly step back. You're not about to be blamed for a sacred crocodile spa day. Eventually, a group of older acolytes manage to lure the beast back toward the reflecting pool using a mixture of raw fish and nervous chanting. The crocodile, either amused or simply hungry, follows at its own pace, tail swishing with a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial. Once it disappears into the water with a final splash, the tension breaks. People laugh nervously, some shake their heads, and a few pretend they were never afraid. But the moment lingers like a half-finished sentence. Later that day, while helping clean the floor where the crocodile slithered, you overhear one priest muttering that the creature's visit occurred on the same day as a lunar omen written on a forgotten scroll. Historians still debate whether Sobek's crocodiles were trained, he adds, or if they were just incredibly good at timing. You wonder about that. Whether these sacred animals are guided by divine will or just very lucky instincts. Or perhaps they understand more about these temple walls than anyone else. After all, crocodiles have seen 1,000 generations come and go. They've watched kings rise, priests argue statues fall, and they've kept swimming. That evening, you pass by the temple pool again. The sun is setting, painting the water in pink and gold, and the surface is still too still. You stop, lean over slightly, and for a second, you think you see something watching you from just beneath the water, a flicker of an eye maybe, or your own reflection. You step back, unsure. Perhaps Sobek hasn't left. Perhaps he never really does. You sit at the edge of the stone path and look out over the pool. You think about how often the divine shows up where it isn't expected, not in chants or crowns, but in teeth and tails and surprise. You recall the panic, the reverence, the questions, and you wonder if that's part of the plan to remind you that the sacred isn't always polite, that sometimes it has scales. One of the kitchen boys joins you munching on a fig. "Did you see it up close?" he asks, mouth full. You nod. "Did it speak to you?" he adds, grinning. You shake your head. "Well," he says, tossing the fig stem into the water, "it probably didn't need to." Everyone listened anyway. You stay a little longer after he leaves. Just listening. The pool makes tiny gurgling sounds, soft and round, like the temple exhaling through water instead of stone. You close your eyes and imagine the crocodile again, moving through hidden canals beneath the city, passing under walls, emerging in secret places. A silent messenger of something older than even the gods carved into the columns. By the time you return to your sleeping mat, night has fully taken hold. You fall asleep faster than usual, your dreams unusually vivid. In one, you are swimming through underground waters, guided by a shadow just ahead, never quite visible. The stone above you hums softly, and somewhere beneath the surface you hear laughter, not mocking, not cruel, but ancient and amused, like the chuckle of something that's been around long enough to know how little we understand. You're halfway through another ordinary morning grinding incense, dodging senior priests, and pretending to remember the difference between symbolic and literal sacrifice when everything changes. Not with a shout or a ceremony, but with a sound, a single, sharp, echoing crack. You freeze mid-task, your hands still coated with resin and ash, as the noise rolls through the Hypostyle Hall like a ripple of thunder beneath the stone. The sound doesn't come from the sky, it comes from within the hall. The columned chamber, usually humming with murmured chants and soft footsteps, falls into immediate silence. Everyone stops. You glance around. Even the birds nesting in the upper alcoves seem to hold their breath. Then slowly, eyes begin to turn toward the source, a circular dais near the center of the hall where one of the ceremonial drums is kept used only during the high festivals or when invoking the storm gods. You've never seen it used outside of a celebration. You've definitely never heard it played without warning. You approach cautiously along with a small wave of curious novices priests and a few attendants pretending they weren't just napping in the shade a moment ago. On the dais stands a tall, wiry priest with a head shaved so cleanly it reflects the sunlight in odd, holy angles. He holds a carved drumstick in one hand, the massive drum surface vibrating faintly from the recent impact. His eyes are closed lips, moving in silent prayer or maybe argument with something invisible. No one dares interrupt. The drum itself is ancient, more sculpture than instrument. It's carved from the hollowed trunk of a sycamore tree said to have grown beside the Nile during a rare flood blessed by the god Min. Its stretched hide is stained dark with age, its edges inlaid with turquoise and copper, half of which is flaked off over the centuries. It's a relic, revered, untouched, until now. You exchange glances with another initiate. He whispers, "I heard the drum only plays when the gods are restless." You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. A few moments later, the priest strikes it again. This time, the sound is even deeper, not loud, but thick, like it's pushing the air aside. The vibration moves through your chest and down into your feet, anchoring you. The hall's acoustics respond in kind, sending the note outward and upward in slow spirals that tickle the tops of the tallest columns. The priest finally opens his eyes and speaks. The silence is full. It must be emptied. Then he steps away, leaving the drum behind. The crowd doesn't applaud. They just part, unsure whether they've witnessed a performance or an omen. You linger, watching the drum now motionless, as though daring someone else to strike it. No one does. Later, during your midday break beneath one of the side alcoves, you overhear two scribes debating the event. One insists that the priest had a vision the night before and was told to awaken the god of storms before the next flood season. The other rolls his eyes and mutters that the priest probably just wanted to test the acoustics before they installed a new roof tile. Historians still debate whether the storm rituals were proactive or reactive, he says dryly, biting into a fig, as if he's solving theology with fruit. You spend the rest of the day feeling slightly off balance. It's not fear. It's more like your senses are sharper. The way the shadows move across the columns seems more deliberate. The rustle of linen robes, the slap of sandals, Even the flicker of oil lamps, all of it feels exaggerated, like the temple is more present, as if it too heard the drum and is waiting. That night, you can't sleep, not because of nightmares, but because the silence is different. It's not absence, it's potential. The air feels full of things almost happening. You sit up, wrap a shawl around your shoulders, and wander into the Hypostyle Hall in the moonlight. The space is nearly empty, save for a pair of night guards who nod and let you pass without question. You make your way to the dais. The drum sits quietly. It doesn't glow or hum or whisper. But as you sit beside it cross-legged, you notice the hall feels smaller somehow. Intimate, as if the vastness has curled inward. You gently tap the edge of the drum, not enough to make noise, just to feel it. The hide is warm, not sun-warm, alive warm. You sit for a long time, waiting for something. A sound, a message, a dream. But all that comes is a breeze. It moves through the temple, gently rustling your robe and skimming across the columns like a finger tracing glyphs. You think about the priest's words. The silence is full. Maybe that's the point. Maybe silence isn't emptiness at all. Maybe it's a vessel, a container waiting to be filled. When you finally return to your mat, the wind follows you for a moment, then fades. You fall asleep to the memory of that sound, the drum's low call, and wonder if the gods really are restless, or if they're simply listening too. The next morning greets you with a sky so clear it feels deliberately painted. Even the doves are quieter than usual, cooing in soft, lazy rhythms, as if mimicking the hush that lingers in the Hypostyle Hall since yesterday's drumbeat. There's something different in the way the light enters today, like it's moving more slowly, reluctant to disturb whatever fragile stillness has settled overnight. You begin your day like any other, sweeping near the southern corridor, replacing burned-out oil lamps, retying a bundle of papyrus scrolls someone had dropped near the statue niche, but your thoughts are elsewhere. You're thinking about stars, or more precisely about the ceiling, because for all the time you spent sweeping floors and listening to whispers in columns and feeling divine vibrations through your fingertips, there's a part of the temple you've never truly looked at. The ceiling stretches high above, painted a deep indigo black and scattered with golden constellations, tiny pinpricks of light that refuse to fade despite centuries of smoke dust and human breath. It's not just decoration, it's a map, and today someone invites you to add to it. A novice not much older than you appears with a small brush and a bowl of crushed gold mixed with gum arabic. He holds them out, wordlessly. You blink at him. Me, he nods, shrugs, and walks away as if he's just handed you a melon instead of a celestial assignment. You stare at the bowl shimmering in the sunlight and then look up, far up, toward the star-painted arch overhead. A rope ladder has already been set in place, leading to a scaffolding that hugs the upper edge of the hall like a fragile spiderweb. You climb. Halfway up, the air changes. It's thinner, still tinged with incense residue and faint echoes that never quite reach the ground. When you reach the top, your breath catches not from exertion, but from the view. From here, the temple floor below looks impossibly distant. Its bustle miniaturized. Its columns transformed into stone stalks rising from a forgotten jungle. But the ceiling is right there, close, immense, alive with stories. You kneel on the wooden platform and dip your brush into the gold. The area you're working on is part of a new constellation being added an eagle in mid-flight, its wings stretching towards Sirius. The outline is already sketched in charcoal. Your task is to fill it in. You touch the brush to the plaster, and the gold clings eagerly. It feels less like painting and more like revealing something that was always there hidden until now. Beside you, another novice works silently, dabbing gold onto a crescent moon. After a few minutes, he whispers, "Whatever star you paint over your sleeping mat will change your dreams." You glance at him, unsure whether he's joking. He doesn't smile, just keeps painting eyes fixed on the curved moon as if it might wink at him. You return to your work, careful not to let your hand shake. As the eagle takes form beneath your brush, you begin to notice something odd, subtle variations in the gold already laid down by others. Some parts gleam brightly, others seem to absorb light. You tilt your head. There are patterns here, tiny glyphs etched into the wings, barely visible unless the light hits just right. Hidden messages. You reach forward and trace one with your finger. It's warm, like it's been whispered into by someone very recently. Later, as you descend the ladder with sore shoulders and golden fingertips, you glance back up and feel something pull at your chest, a strange affection, almost longing. You help the sky become itself again. You gave light to a bird that had been sleeping above everyone's heads. You walk back toward the novices' quarters, but instead of heading to your own space, you quietly move your mat beneath that eagle, just in case. That night, your dreams change. You don't see the eagle exactly, but you feel it circling above you, always just out of sight. You dream of rivers winding through the stars, of stairways made of soft stone, of a voice calling your name not through sound, but through color. And when you wake, just before dawn, heart still echoing with things you can't describe, you sit up and look at the ceiling. The eagle's wing glints faintly in the darkness, a golden curve catching the first blue light of morning. One of the elders passes and sees you staring upward. He smiles faintly. "The ceiling remembers," he says. "It has to. The gods don't always look down. Sometimes they look sideways." You nod, unsure what to say. You're not sure what any of this means, only that something changed when you added that star. Something tilted in your dreams. Something tilted in you. Later that day, while sorting offerings near the eastern corridor, you overhear two priests discussing the constellations. One claims the ceiling is a calendar mapping past floods and future deaths. The other insists it's a giant net holding in the night sky, so it doesn't fall and crush the world. Historians still debate whether the stars were painted for the gods or for us. One of them mutters, "You say nothing, but you know this. When you placed that brush stroke of gold, the hall breathed differently. The air shifted, the silence leaned in, and now, when you walk the temple floor, you no longer look only around you. You look up, and every time the eagle is still there. The sun rises hot and hard the next morning, turning the flagstones under your feet into something just shy of punishment. Even the cats slinking through the colonnades are too lazy to chase beetles. You're stationed near the western edge of the Hypostyle Hall, where preparations are underway for something unusual, an annual rite you've only heard about in whispers and warnings, the Festival of Drunkenness. Despite the name, no one's laughing. Not yet. You help carry jars of wine, real wine, not the watered-down ceremonial kind, into the side chamber reserved for the ritual. The jars are heavy sealed with wax and marked with painted symbols one for Hathor, goddess of music and joy, one for Sekhmet, goddess of war and wrath. A strange pairing, but you're told that they are sometimes one and the same, depending on the day, the mood, and perhaps the amount of wine consumed. An older priest gives you a quick explanation that sounds half rehearsed and half warning. The festival, he says, commemorates the day humanity was nearly destroyed by Sekhmet, who had become so furious with mankind's wickedness that she began devouring them by the dozens. The gods, alarmed by her efficiency, tricked her by dyeing beer red to resemble blood and leaving it for her to drink. She did. She drank it all. She fell asleep, and when she awoke, she was transformed, tamer, gentler, reborn as Hathor. So he finishes placing a hand on your shoulder. Today we drink, and we hope the goddess stays asleep. By late morning, the chamber is full of song. Musicians pluck at harps and tap rhythmically on hand drums. Priests dance not with grace but with feeling, and novices follow awkwardly, trying to imitate the steps while holding on to their balance. You're handed a cup of sweet dark wine thick with spices. You hesitate. A scribe leans in and mutters, "Don't worry. It only invites visions if you're lucky." You sip. The wine is warm, slightly gritty with notes of fig and something floral. It settles in your belly like a tiny sun. Around you, the music grows louder, the voices looser, the movements more joyful. Someone begins to recite poetry full of metaphors about cows and moonlight and laughter that sounds like river water. Another initiate starts describing a dream where he spoke to a lion with 7 mouths. He claims it told him which day he'd die. Then he laughs so hard he nearly drops his cup. As the afternoon ripens, the air thickens with incense, sweat, and stories. The priests are no longer just dancing. They're swaying, staggering, lifting their arms to the sky like they might lift off if they lean back far enough. You sit near the edge of the room, slightly dizzy, watching a particularly dramatic priest twirl in place, shouting, "Hathor rides a goose, a golden goose. I saw her, I saw her." Everyone cheers. You blink. Was that a metaphor? A memory? A hallucination? You're not sure. The lines between myth and moment are unraveling fast. You lean your head back against a column, its surface pleasantly cool against your wine-warmed skin. You close your eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind your eyelids, images begin to swirl, a desert lit by stars. A lion-headed goddess wading through blood that turns into pomegranate juice, a laughing face that shifts between beauty and terror in a single breath. You hear bells that no one is ringing. You feel the air change. When you open your eyes, the room is quieter, not silent, just softer. The music is now a gentle murmur. The dancers have slowed. Many are lying on the floor, hands folded across their chests, smiling in the strange serenity of divine intoxication. A priest nearby murmurs a hymn, his voice slurred but sweet. You realize this is the part no one talks about, the afterglow, the gentle fading of fury into calm. The moment Sekhmet becomes Hathor again. You step outside for air. The hall is bathed in gold columns, casting long shadows across the temple floor. You walk slowly, the world tilting slightly beneath your feet, but in a rhythmic, almost musical way. You sit beneath the statue of Hathor near the reflecting pool and look at your wine-stained fingertips. Somewhere inside the chaos of earlier is still humming, but now it's quieter, like a memory filed neatly on a shelf. An elder priest passes you and chuckles. You saw her, didn't you? You nod. You don't have the words to explain what you saw or felt or imagined, but you saw something. He smiles, presses a fig into your hand, and says, "Now you understand why we keep her pleased." That night, your dreams are a kaleidoscope, not frightening, just vivid. You dream of mirrors that reflect not your face, but your intentions, of lions napping beside flutes, of wine jugs floating like boats on a river made of starlight. When you wake, there's a dried hibiscus petal on your blanket, though you have no idea where it came from. You carry it with you all day, tucked into your sleeve, just in case the goddess decides to laugh again. You wake the next day, feeling like the festival never ended. Not because you're dizzy or tired, but because the temple still carries the scent of sweet wine and laughter faint in the air, like the echo of a song that doesn't want to leave. The halls are quieter now, solemn again, but somehow changed, as if the stones themselves remember the dancing. You resume your duties with fresh energy, polishing one of the lesser-used corridors near the eastern entrance, when a novice runs past you, nearly trips over his own feet, and shouts over his shoulder, "It's back." The echo is back. You blink, broom in hand. What echo you call after him? But he's already gone. You follow, curious, tracing the sound of his footsteps until you reach the hall of recitation. It's usually reserved for evening chants, structured hymns, and rehearsed verses offered to statues who stare blankly through millennia. But today, something is different. A few priests are gathered near the center, standing in a loose circle, staring up at the ceiling. One of them, eyes wide, is whispering a line from a hymn, the kind recited during morning rites. Only he isn't finishing the line. The echo is. You hear it yourself a moment later. He says, "Praise to the morning sun who awakens," and then he stops. And the air, still breathless, responds, the lotus and the sky. You freeze. It's not just a delayed repetition. It's not a normal echo. It answers before it should. And it doesn't sound like his voice. Not quite. It's similar, but not identical. Deeper, slower, as if it traveled a long way and came back tired. You stand there suddenly aware of every breath you take, the weight of the broom in your hand, the way the floor seems to hum faintly beneath your feet. The priest tries again. Another phrase, this time from a different hymn. Again, the echo answers, not following, but anticipating. Like a friend who finishes your sentences, but somehow knows them before you say them. One of the scribes steps forward, scroll in hand, and begins murmuring notes. "Same thing happened 3 years ago," he says. "Same time of year, just for one day." The echo's reversed. He doesn't sound surprised. If anything, he sounds annoyed. We'll need to document the sequence, match it to the lunar phase, the tide schedules, and maybe ask if anyone's been messing with the columns again. You edge closer. Is it a person hiding somewhere, you ask? The scribe gives you a flat look. If it is, they've memorized every sacred verse and can mimic 5 different priests in perfect voice backward. You nod slowly and decide not to ask more questions. Instead, you try something yourself. You wait for a quiet moment, then step forward and speak a line you learned on your first day. The breath of Amun travels the sky like wind through wheat. Nothing. You feel a little silly. But then a full 5 seconds later, a whisper rises soft, distant, and strange, like wind through wheat, but not in your voice, and not in anyone else's either. You glance around. No one is laughing. No one is moving. The entire room has shifted into something between awe and fear. You feel a chill that doesn't belong in this sun-baked space. It creeps along your spine like a thread being pulled gently but deliberately. Eventually, the high priest steps forward, his expression unreadable. "The temple remembers," he says quietly, "and sometimes it speaks." That's all he offers before turning and walking away, robes fluttering like wings. For the rest of the day, no one speaks above a whisper. You catch others testing it, soft recitations, half phrases, subtle coughs, all of them hoping to provoke the echo again. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But even when it doesn't, the silence feels charged, like something wants to respond but is waiting for a better moment. That night, you can't help yourself. You return to the hall of recitation alone, the stars blinking overhead through narrow slits in the ceiling. You step into the center heart, thumping, and speak once more. This is the house of gods carved in breath and memory. You wait. The silence is complete. You turn to leave, but just before you reach the threshold, you hear it. Not from behind, not from in front, but from inside the walls. Breath and memory. You exhale slowly and smile just a little. Maybe the gods are listening, or maybe the temple is, and either way it means you're not alone. You're awakened just before dawn by a deep, rhythmic rumble that isn't thunder. It's subtler, almost like someone shaking a massive jar far below your feet. At first, you think it's a dream. Then the second tremor rolls through, stronger this time, rattling a jug off its shelf and sending a nearby scribe into a very unpriestly squeal. You sit up, heart pounding. Somewhere deep within the temple, the stone is moving. The Hypostyle Hall is already buzzing when you arrive. Everyone is alert eyes, scanning the towering columns as if expecting one of them to suddenly develop opinions. The stone feels different today, tense, as if it's bracing for something. You overhear a priest muttering that this kind of vibration usually comes before a flood or a landslide, or once a locust swarm that somehow only attacked a single noble's vineyard. Another priest insists it's just settling that 3,000-year-old buildings do that sometimes. No one looks convinced. Then it happens. A loud, sharp crack echoes through the hall. A gust of dust bursts from above. One of the smaller lotus-topped columns near the far end of the hall has shifted. Only slightly, but enough that a chip of stone tumbles down and lands with a sound far too soft for the amount of panic it causes. A handful of acolytes scramble backward. The guards raise their staffs. The birds in the rafters take off in a sudden flutter of wings. The column does not fall, but it leans just a few finger widths off-center, like someone nudged it during a yawn. For a moment, no one breathes. Then a single voice cuts through the air, the high architect. He arrives with a dozen stone workers and immediately begins issuing commands, his voice as steady as the walls he builds. You step back, feeling the weight of it all pressing down, not just the ceiling, but the legacy, the age, the sheer mass of memory held inside these pillars. Rumors ripple faster than repairs. Some say it's the work of an angry god. Others whisper that a priest failed to complete his purification rites before stepping into the sanctuary, a rare offense with dangerous consequences. One even suggests that someone spoke the wrong name in the echo chamber, disturbing an old agreement between stone and silence. You don't know what to believe, but you know how it felt. The vibration, the breath in the walls, the way the dust fell like snow from a sky that was never supposed to move. As the workers begin their delicate assessments, you're sent to assist with relocating scrolls from a nearby archive alcove. It's a small task, but it keeps you close. As you work, you listen. The stone creaks occasionally, like old wood. One of the older priests murmurs a blessing every time he walks beneath the compromised column, as if that might keep it upright. Another carves a fresh offering into a nearby slab, an emergency inscription to appease whomever or whatever lives in the cracks. By midday, a temporary support is in place, and the danger appears to have passed. But the feeling doesn't. The temple still hums low and uncertain. You sit beside the pool at dusk, watching the reflection of the columns ripple in the water. You wonder how many of them have shifted before silently unnoticed. How much movement hides in structures built to seem eternal. An old scribe joins you, and after a long silence says, "The first time I saw a column move, I cried." You glance at him. I thought it meant the gods were angry, that everything was falling apart. He chuckles softly. Turns out, even perfect things shift under their own weight. You nod. You think about the temple, its design, its careful lines, its stories etched in stone. And yet beneath it all, pressure builds. Stone shifts. Maybe gods do too that night. Sleep is fitful. In your dreams, the columns sway gently like reeds in wind. They whisper names you've never heard in voices not quite human. One falls slowly toward you, but just before it lands, you wake, sweating, heart racing. You rise and return to the hall, now quiet again, cloaked in moonlight. You walk to the tilted column and place your hand on it. The surface is warm. The shift is slight, barely noticeable if you didn't know where to look. But it's there. Not failure, not destruction, just change. You run your fingers over the carved lotus and whisper a prayer, not for stability, but for strength to bend without breaking. As you turn to go, a tiny flake of stone falls from the top, landing softly beside your foot. You pick it up. You carry it with you the rest of the night. You're called to the sanctuary before sunrise. That alone is strange. Initiates are rarely allowed near the innermost chamber, let alone invited. A junior priest meets you at the threshold of the Hypostyle Hall, his expression unreadable in the dim blue light of early dawn. He says only one word, "Come." The temple is silent. Not the kind of silence that follows music or laughter, but a deeper stillness, the sort that feels carved into the air itself. You walk behind him across the hall where you've swept, watched, listened, and dreamed. The columns watch you pass as always tall and unmoving, but today you feel as though they recognize you. Or perhaps you finally recognize them. You're led through 3 inner chambers, each smaller than the last. The air grows cooler, heavier, not with dust, but with meaning, with expectation. Eventually, you reach a black stone door flanked by carvings of falcons and cobras. The priest places his hand on the center of the door. It opens with a sound softer than breath. Inside the sanctuary is smaller than you imagined. Not grand, not gold-covered. The walls are smooth, undecorated. The only feature is the central platform where a single statue stands, Amun, carved in dark stone, gazing forward with eyes that haven't blinked in over 2 millennia. You take one step inside, then another. The priest says nothing. He stays outside. This is for you. You walk forward slowly barefoot. The stone beneath you is warm, not from sunlight. There is none, but from something else. Memory, intention, presence. You stop in front of the statue and wait. You're not sure what for. Instructions, a vision, a voice, but none comes. And yet, the room is not empty. You feel it in the pressure on your skin, in the weight behind your eyes, in the way your breath catches just slightly. A vibration, a hum. You felt it before beneath the columns, in the whispering floors, in the crawl spaces. But this is the source, or perhaps not the source, but the amplifier, the place where all the other sounds gather and echo, the heart of the temple. You sit cross-legged on the floor palms, resting on your knees. You close your eyes, and then you hear it. A voice, not loud, not external. It doesn't speak in words, not exactly. It speaks in images, impressions, shapes of sound. You hear footsteps in sand, a river flowing backward, laughter that turns to chanting. You see firelight on a priest's face, smoke curling upward toward stars. You see yourself smaller, younger, sweeping the hall for the first time, and you feel something strange. Not awe, not fear, recognition. Like the temple knows you, like it has always known you. You open your eyes, and for a moment, everything is illuminated, though no light has changed. The carvings seem brighter. The lines in the stone are more defined. Even the silence is richer, layered with 1,000 unspoken stories. You stand and place your hand on the foot of the statue. The stone is warm. It hums faintly just beneath the surface, like a sleeping animal dreaming beneath your touch. You close your eyes again and whisper, "Thank you." Not sure to whom, but knowing it's the right thing to say. You leave the sanctuary slowly, each step a little harder than the last. Not because your body aches, but because you know something has ended. Or maybe begun. Outside, the priest nods but doesn't speak. You pass him and walk back into the Hypostyle Hall. The sky is brighter now. Pale gold light spills across the floor. The columns catch it gently glowing at their bases like ancient candles. The temple breathes again. The silence isn't gone. It's changed. It's fuller. And within it, you carry something new. Not knowledge, not power. A memory, a resonance, a voice that no longer surprises you. The sun now creeps through the upper slits of the temple dust motes, dancing in its path like slow drifting stars. You walk quietly, calmly one last time through the forest of columns, the soles of your feet brushing against the ancient stone, as if the temple itself is lulling you into stillness. The echoes are soft now, not voices, not whispers, just the gentle rhythm of your own breath blending with the memory of 1,000 others who passed this way. Everything feels slower. The air, thicker and sweeter than before, clings gently to your skin. The breeze that brushes your cheek is warm like a sigh from a long-forgotten god who finally found rest. You pause near the center of the hall and tilt your head upward. The ceiling is painted in stars. You trace them with your eyes gently, one by one, until the gold blurs and your eyelids grow heavy. This temple was never just stone. It was a song held together by silence, a memory carved into light and shadow, a voice waiting patiently for someone like you to listen. And now you have. So lie back, gentle traveler. Let the echoes fade into your dream. Let the stars above you hum their ancient lullabies. And if by chance a whisper finds you in your sleep, don't be afraid. It's only the temple saying, "Good night."